Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, I had to restart Zoom. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the new parent selection. I call it, well, it's Nexthop selection enhancements that we're working on. It involves some API changes. I've been working with Rob Butts here at Comcast. Rob actually has done most of this work that I'm going to show you today, but he's out on vacation and couldn't make the summit. So the bulk of the talk is going to be about adding plug-in support into the Nexthop selection strategies. So, over the last year and a half, 2 years, we met, we had some Nexthop meetings, and we wanted to move parent selection to use a YAML configuration, and we wanted to have support for parent selection plugins. So, several people here were, we all worked together to come up with a YAML format and so on. But last year I worked on implementing it. I added the Nexthop selection strategies into ATS 9, and currently it coexists with the parent selection. They're different. The Nexthop selection strategies are part of Remap, but they coexist, and there's some wrapper functions in HTTP transact if for a particular remap rule, if you define a strategy in a strategies.yaml and you choose to use it for a particular remap rule, the strategies is preferred over parent selection.
Can you do that via a plugin, John?
I'm sorry?
Is there a plugin call that I can set the strategy?
That's what I'm going to talk about here.
Right.
We're working on that part. This is in core. It's all in proxy remap.
Right.
So yeah, we got it in last year. If you want to use it, all you have to do is define a strategy in strategies.yaml. You use this tag in the remap.config, and it wires up the URL mapping struct to use that strategy instance. So when remap ATS starts, or when the remap config gets reloaded, remap creates a factory that reads the strategies.yaml, creates instances of Nexthop selection strategies, and will, if your remap rule, if you assign one of those strategies to a remap rule, it sets a shared pointer up for the state machine to use. And then, and what one of the big advantages of that is it eliminates, over parent selection, it eliminates, having to look up a parent config entry at when you need to use it. It has the Nexthop selection has better debug logging, a very large number of unit tests. It's well tested, and you can has all the same feature set as parent selection. The configuration is just different, but you could completely replace parent selection with it. And I gave a if you want to look at the details on how to configure it, use it, I've got a presentation from last fall. I got a link here. But if you're going to ATS 9 and you want to use parent selection, I'd encourage you to take a look at the Nexthop stuff. Because eventually I think in some future release, we'll probably deprecate parent selection and maybe eventually remove it from traffic server.
Leif, what are your guys' plans on moving over to Nexthop?
Beg your pardon?
I was asking Leif, Leif, what are your plans on moving over to Nexthop?
Yes.
Okay.
This is something that's been designed together. I know Comcast has done most of the actual coding implementation, but it's been a pretty close collaboration between VJ's team and Rushford's team here to get everything to the requirements that we all have.
Well, because we're still on CARP. We're on our little CARP, or we're on our own CARP implementation, which we'd rather move over to parent selection, but now because of Nexthop, should we just go right over to Nexthop instead of?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to look into.
Okay.
You don't use the old stuff even if you can. I mean, there's no reason to. This is just going to be both faster and more features.
I'm just wondering who's else running it in production, so that way we don't go out on our own limb ourselves. So I'd assume Comcast. Are you guys running this in production?
Not yet. We're not on ATS 9 yet.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at it.
And you didn't backport it into your own version yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the thing Rob's been working on now is building a plugin that can create an instance of a Nexthop selection strategy and then set up the pointers and the URL mapping for the state machine to use it. So he's using TS remap new instance to create a instance of it when the DSO gets loaded and passes in the config for it, and it creates a Nexthop selection strategy and wires it up for use. And he's had to, I'll show you the interface here in a minute, but he's had to go through and add some new API functions so that the plugin can, make updates to the state machine with the selected parent info, host name, port. So here's the current interface in ATS 9. And when we started looking at the, enhancing it to support plugins, we decided we needed to clean up this interface a little bit. You'll see that it passes in a lot of parameters from the SM. And then we also wanted to simplify it somewhat. So we came up with this new interface. We refactored it, simplified it. And since we're going to use it for plugins, we're using that opaque pointer to the SM. And then, lessen the amount of parameters we pass in. And there was some really ugly logic in the HTTP transact to determine if a response received from the cache upstream, if it was retriable or not. So the state machine was looking at fields within the class. It had too much knowledge of, trying to determine if a response was retriable. We just abstracted it and simplified the wrapper code. And then this new interface, if a plugin creates a Nexthop selection strategy, it has access to all the TS API functions. And so this is actually the first step. We went in and simplified this, and then as we were working on it, Rob was working on it, he found a couple minor bugs in the Nexthop strategy. So we have a PR up there. I think VJ's currently reviewing it. With this PR, it changes the Nexthop selection strategy interface, fixes a couple bugs, and and it simplified some of the HTTP transact wrappers.
So the DSO is expected to implement a concrete instance of this class?
He's using the TS remap new instance So when that gets called, his plugin will, the DSO is loaded and linked into Apache traffic server. All the symbols are there. So
Right. But that DSO is expected to have a subclass of this class that's a concrete implementation, correct?
yeah, yes, that's correct. Yeah. That's currently what we're looking at,
And then that's provided, the pointer to that, an instance of that concrete class is provided to the core, correct?
Say that again, Alan.
A pointer to so the DSO implements a concrete class. It then creates an instance and passes a pointer to that instance to the core.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it sets a pointer in the URL mapping struct and remap. So what Rob's done, he's, there's a class in there for Nexthop selection strategy that implements the consistent hashing. He took that class and modified it and built a plugin with it, an experimental plugin. And he's still working on this, so we don't have anything that we can throw up just yet for everyone to review, but he's got it working. So what it does is, as it parses the remap config when it gets reloaded or ATS is started, it will create an instance of the strategy when it's seen in the remap config, and it'll create an instance and register it with the Nexthop strategy factory, so that if any other remap rule wants to use the same instance of the strategy, it's already there and initialized. And so in his example plugin, I've got an example remap. So the remap manages the life cycle of the DSO. So it'll load the plugin, and then he just passes in configuration parameters and names the strategy. And in this example, he's just using the SO name in the strategy factory. And the pointer gets set up for the state machine.
Why does he have to specify the SO twice?
Well, he's in this example. So remap loads the SO. You give it
That one,
name,
right?
and the name of the plugin, and then he's this at strategy tag. You have to, when the strategy factory keeps track. It's a hash table. The key is a string name of the strategy, and the value is the instance of the strategy that was created. So here he's just saying this remap uses the strategy named consistent hash.so. Then it wires up the pointer and the URL mapping with that strategy from the factory.
So when the plugin is called, it puts those entries into the table?
Yeah. When the plugin, he doesn't create any continuations or register to look for any other hooks. We only use remap to load the DSO and then initialize the pointer in the URL mapping struct. That's all.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how your strategy table gets set up. So the plugin looks through the .yaml and then makes calls in to populate the strategy table.
It's a factory.
Right. So, how do the entries in the factory get put in there?
Okay, when ATS is started or the remap config is reloaded,
right,
the remap creates the factory, and the factory immediately reads the strategies.yaml file, and it creates It creates
Okay.
instances of each strategy, keeps track of them by name. Then this plugin, it creates an instance and it just registers it into the factory. So that if any other plugin, remap rule wants to use that same strategy with the same configuration, all they have to do is add that strategy tag in.
Okay.
And then it'll get it from the factory. And so this plugin Rob wrote, it requires some new API functions. And these are the ones that he's using for this particular plugin. So at some point, when this is all finalized, we'll probably propose adding these to the Ink API. But he needs to get access to the host status stuff to get the status of a particular host. And with the last function there, he can retrieve a modifiable copy of the parent result struct to set the host name and port for the upstream proxy. And that's really about it. That's all I have on this so far. Rob couldn't be here today, but I think at some in the fall summit, we'll have a lot more detail on all this. And we look forward to any feedback or questions you have about it. Oh yeah, one we were also going to investigate adding additional transaction hooks and TS event IDs so that we could wrap these calls into callbacks using continuations, or perhaps even just I think adding these transaction hooks would enable the use of standard remap plugins to do parent selection. And
What would these hooks do? Would they be part of the parent selection?
Or yeah, right now the Nexthop and parent selection, say after the cache read complete hook is, once you go into the when you hit that hook, you can do, there is some API calls to set the parent result, but and it will do parent selection. But if you there's some in-band health checking. So if you get a connection error when you try to use that parent, the state machine will mark that parent down and select a new parent to complete the transaction. So there's no way for a plugin to be called back to do another lookup or mark a parent down. So I think we need some.
Is this related to the diagram we did at that summit workshop a couple of years ago in Denver?
Yeah.
We ended up with a diagram of I try upstream and then something happens and I make some calls. So you can make that a hook, right? Is that your plan?
Well, right now we're able to accomplish that with what Rob's done in his experimental plug, and it just sets the pointer to an instance of his strategy, and all that works today. We're just saying if we, going forward, it may be a good idea to add some additional transaction hooks so that we can have better control over that, to go back and mark parents down and select a new parent for the transaction.
Yeah, it kind of bleeds over into outbound session hooks, which we've talked about on and off as well. If you could ping me offline, because we've been looking at some stuff like that, right? Because this is all about the life cycle of an outbound connection. You know, I'm going to go upstream. I'm going to connect upstream. I connected and it didn't work. I connected and the session is up. Blah blah blah. Right. So we should probably, if you're gonna have these hooks, we should probably coordinate on how those intersect with the outbound session hooks.
Yeah, it's just something we're going to look at. So yeah, we'll do that, Alan. We'll coordinate with you. But yeah, that's all I've got on it. If there are any other questions or feedback anyone has.
Yeah, I'm still kind of unclear what your plugin loading is really doing. Does the strategy.yaml cause DSOs to get loaded?
So we talked about using the strategy factory itself to load the DSO. We were going to put a file name attribute in the YAML and a new strategy type, you know, would say plugin, then have the factory load the DSO. But Remap already does a really good job of that. You know, it manages the life cycle of, you know, loading and reloading the DSO. So we are just using the Remap. We create a plugin.
Hey John, this is Gancho. I just want this is going to use the existing plugin DSO class, right? It's like inheriting.
We just, if I go back to that example, we just create a where is that? Yeah, see this remap entry? Can you the fourth bullet down? Okay. So we just use the plugin, Nexthop strategy consistent hash.so, and then Remap loads it, right? Manages the thing. We didn't, I think Rob added some code to run the, no, I don't think he had to do that. Yeah, but we let the Remap load the DSO. And he just added some code to, you know, register that loaded DSO with the strategy factory.
So the Nexthop, the tag on that strategy there, that could have been Gancho, right? It doesn't have to be the name of the DSO, does it?
Yeah, it could be anything. It could be food, bar, Gancho, whatever you want to name your strategy. It has to match a name in the, well, I'm sorry, belay that. If it's not a plugin, well, every strategy has to have a name.
Right.
So the strategies enumerated in the strategies.yaml all have names, but here he's saying load this this plugin will register with the factory using that name.
Right. So that means that the tag on this strategy is not in the strategy.yaml.
Yeah, it's not in the strategies.yaml.
Okay.
With his plugin, he passes in you see that.
Right. He gets a config file there.
Yeah, he's passing in his own YAML file, but that YAML file matches the structure of the strategies.yaml.
It doesn't have to though, right? Because it's only parsed by his plugin.
Yeah, it doesn't have to.
Okay, so that's a choice of convenience.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be YAML.
Right, but does the strategy there have to match the DSO name and plugin?
No, it doesn't have to. He could have given it any name.
Right. So the plugin when it gets loaded is going to register some name. You could register the name Gancho, and then your strategy would say Gancho.
Yeah.
Okay. I got to say honestly, John, using the .so in the name there is just a tad confusing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
I agree.
Sorry about that.
Because you think that it's loading a plugin or something. It's like loading it. The plugin's loading itself, or.
Yeah. Yeah, he just this was the config he used for testing it, so he just chose to use that name.
All right, I'm done.
Yeah, that's where we're headed. So, and I think in the fall we'll have a lot more to show and have everybody look at.